Most Americans looking at the housing market right now feel trapped between three bad choices. Pay too much for an ordinary house in a crowded suburb. Buy a tiny home that turns out to cost far more than the advertisement suggested. Or keep renting and hope that one day prices and mortgage payments somehow become reasonable again. But drive far enough away from the places everyone talks about, and the picture begins to change. In New Mexico, there are still communities where the price of an aging suburban house somewhere else can buy a real home, real land, a workshop, a barn, mountain views, or enough open space that your nearest neighbor is no longer part of your daily life. That sounds like the good news, and much of it is. But there is one thing almost nobody puts in the thumbnail. The cheapest house may not be the cheapest house to own. A property with an astonishingly low asking price can become expensive very quickly. When the road is difficult, the water system needs attention, the house cannot qualify for ordinary financing, the septic system is aging, the nearest hospital is an hour away, or the solar batteries need replacement. Meanwhile, a more expensive property with a working well, legal access, a useful garage, established utilities, and conventional financing may actually cost less to live in over the next 10 years. That is what makes New Mexico so interesting. This is not simply a state full of cheap houses, it is a state full of trade-offs, and the people who understand those trade-offs are the ones most likely to find the real bargains. The housing numbers people hear about rarely tell the whole story because a statewide average mixes expensive destinations with small towns, mountain communities, high desert properties, farming areas, and places most buyers never search. A home near a famous destination can be expensive, while another property, a few hours away, may offer acres of land for a fraction of the cost. So, instead of looking at another list of cheap houses and pretending every low price is automatically a bargain, it makes more sense to ask a better question. What does your money actually buy in New Mexico, and what are you giving up to get it? Start below $100,000, because this is the price range that makes people stop scrolling. A whole house, for less than the price of some new luxury pickup trucks, sounds almost impossible now. In much of America, it nearly is. But in parts of New Mexico, properties below six figures can still appear. And the first thing you need to understand is that you are rarely buying perfection. At this level, the market usually asks you to solve something. Sometimes it is condition. You may find an older site-built home in a small town with 2 bedrooms, a detached garage, a basement, and a price that looks like it came from another decade. The structure may be real. The lot may be useful. The streets may already be established. Basic services may be close. But the roof could be near the end of its life. The electrical system may need attention. The furnace may be old. The basement may be unfinished. The kitchen may have survived 40 years without anyone feeling an urgent need to modernize it. For the right buyer, none of that automatically makes the property a bad deal. A dated house is not the same thing as a bad house. An ugly kitchen can be changed. A detached garage can be valuable. A basement can provide storage, workshop space, or future flexibility. A house inside a real town may also have something remote acreage cannot easily provide: established roads, nearby services, utility connections, and a property type that banks and insurance companies already understand. But the low number on the listing can be dangerous because it makes buyers stop doing math. Suppose a house is listed for $80,000. That feels incredibly cheap. Then you add a roof. You add electrical repairs. You add plumbing surprises. You add heating upgrades. You add insurance. You add whatever the inspection discovers after the excitement wears off. Suddenly, the $80,000 bargain may still be a bargain, but it is not the bargain you thought you were buying. The correct question is never simply, can I afford the purchase price? The better question is, what will this property cost before it becomes the property I believe I am buying? That distinction is one of the most important things in affordable real estate. The second kind of property that can appear below $100,000 is even more unusual, and for some people, far more exciting: the off-grid home. This is where New Mexico can feel like a completely different housing universe. You may find a small home powered by solar panels, heated with wood, supplied by stored water, rain catchment, a well, or some combination of those systems, sitting beneath a huge sky with almost no conventional monthly utility bill. To someone exhausted by electric bills, water bills, rising rent, property taxes, and the endless recurring cost of ordinary suburban life, the idea can feel like freedom. And sometimes it is. A properly designed off-grid property can provide a level of independence that a normal suburban home simply cannot. But off-grid living is not ordinary homeownership with fewer bills. It is a different relationship with the systems that keep a house functioning. When the power goes out in a conventional house, most people call the utility company and wait. When an off-grid battery bank fails, it is your system. When a city water customer turns on the faucet, the infrastructure is somewhere else, and someone else is responsible for maintaining it. When your home depends on stored water, hauled water, a private well, or rain catchment, water becomes part of your daily property management. When your main source of heat is a wood stove, winter preparation is not optional. When your solar system is aging, battery replacement may be a major future expense. The independence is real, but so is the responsibility. That does not make off-grid property unattractive. It simply means the buyer has to want the lifestyle, not just the price. For a person who genuinely values independence, understands basic systems, accepts a remote location, and does not need a conventional suburban routine, an inexpensive off-grid property can unlock something a much more expensive city house cannot. Space, silence, lower recurring utility costs, dark skies, privacy, a different pace of life. But for someone who simply wants a cheap, normal house, that same property can become exhausting very quickly. This leads to the first major rule of buying rural property. Never confuse a low purchase price with a low complexity life. Now move into the range between roughly $100,000 and $175,000. This is where New Mexico begins to become especially interesting, because you are still shopping well below the price of many ordinary homes in major American markets. But you may start finding properties that demand fewer heroic compromises. Perhaps it is a 3-bedroom manufactured home on 2 fenced acres. Perhaps it is a small custom-built house with a private well. Perhaps it is a maintained home near public land, with enough room for a workshop, an RV, a few animals, a garden, or simply a life that does not happen 6 feet from the neighbor's fence. At this level, the house itself may still be modest, and that is often the point. A buyer priced out of Denver, Phoenix, Austin, coastal California, or many growing metropolitan areas may not be looking for a marble kitchen and a perfect staged living room. They may simply want a house they can own without spending the next 30 years feeling trapped by the payment. A smaller home on usable land can be far more valuable to that person than a larger home on a tiny suburban lot. But acreage creates another illusion. People see 2 acres, 5 acres, 10 acres, or 20 acres and assume more land always means more value. It does not. Usable land matters more than impressive acreage. 5 flat acres with legal access, fencing, reliable water, a practical driveway, and room for a workshop may be far more useful than 20 difficult acres with no dependable water source and a road that becomes a problem every time the weather changes. The listing photos cannot tell you everything. The acreage number cannot tell you everything. You need to understand what the land actually allows you to do. Can you reach the property year-round? Is the road public, private, county maintained, or maintained by the people who live there? Is there a legal easement? Can a delivery truck reach the home? Can emergency vehicles reach it? What happens after heavy rain? What happens after snow? Where does the water come from? Where does wastewater go? How far are you from the nearest place that can repair the systems you depend on? These are not exciting questions. They do not make good thumbnails. But they are exactly the questions that separate a dream property from a property that only photographs like a dream. Water should move near the top of the checklist for almost any rural buyer. A working private well can be a major advantage, but the sentence there is "a well" should never end the investigation. You want to understand whether it is functioning properly. You want to know what records exist. You want to know whether the production is adequate for the way you intend to use the property. You want to understand what happens if the pump fails or the water quality changes. The same logic applies to septic systems. A rural house can look completely normal inside, while depending on expensive infrastructure buried underground. When that infrastructure works, most people barely think about it. When it fails, the cost becomes very real. This is why an ordinary-looking house with proven systems can be more valuable than a dramatic bargain with unanswered questions. The same principle applies to manufactured housing, which is another category many buyers misunderstand. New Mexico has many rural properties built around manufactured homes, and for the right buyer, they can offer one of the most affordable paths to owning both a home and land. A manufactured home on several acres with a guest house, workshop, studio, storage building, or RV shelter may offer more useful lifestyle space than a conventional site-built home that costs twice as much. But the details matter. How old is the home? How is it installed? What type of foundation does it have? How is it classified? Can your lender finance it? Can your insurance company cover it? How will the next buyer finance it when you eventually sell? A manufactured home is not automatically a bad investment, and a site-built home is not automatically a good one. But the financing and resale markets can behave differently, and those differences need to be understood before you buy. This is one of the most useful habits a rural buyer can develop. Identify the reason the property is cheaper. Sometimes the reason is harmless. The town is small, the kitchen is outdated, the nearest major store is 45 minutes away. The house is manufactured, the seller needs to move. The property is simply outside the areas most buyers search. Other times, the discount is warning you. No conventional financing, unclear access, unpermitted additions, water problems, major deferred maintenance, difficult insurance, structural concerns. A property can look cheap for two completely different reasons. One is opportunity, the other is risk. Your job is to find out which one you are looking at before your emotions make the decision for you. Now move into what may be the sweet spot for many buyers, roughly $175,000 to $250,000. This is where the conversation starts to change, because you may no longer be shopping only for survival-level affordability. You may be shopping for genuine lifestyle value. This is where 10 acres and a barn can enter the picture. A newer manufactured home or site-built home may become possible. A real workshop may appear. You may find multiple water sources. You may find a traditional adobe home whose thick walls and regional character give the property a completely different feeling from ordinary frame construction. You may find enough land for horses, gardens, equipment, a detached shop, or a second structure. And the surprising part is that the house does not always have to be a wreck. Some rural properties in this range are affordable simply because they are located where demand is lower. That is the trade. You are not beating the housing market through magic. You are exchanging location for space. The farther you move from a major employment center, the less competition you may face. But distance has a cost, and that cost changes depending on your life. An hour to a hospital is different when you are 28 years old than when you are 72. An hour to a major grocery store sounds romantic until you forget one important item. A beautiful mountain road in summer is not necessarily the same road in winter. A remote house is not simply a suburban house with better views. Your entire weekly routine changes. That is why the best property is not necessarily the one with the most acreage. For many buyers, the ideal rural location is not the middle of nowhere. It is the edge of nowhere. Far enough out to get privacy, land, dark skies, and quiet. close enough that groceries, medical care, fuel, hardware, and basic services do not become full-day expeditions. That middle ground can be incredibly valuable, especially for retirees. The dream is often peace. The mistake is accidentally buying isolation. Those are not the same thing. At this price level, one of the strongest rural property features can also become more common: a real workshop, barn, or detached garage. People often focus so intensely on bedroom count that they ignore the value of secondary buildings. But for many rural buyers, a 30 by 30 barn, a detached workshop, a studio, or a real garage can completely change how the property functions. It can protect equipment, store vehicles, support a small business, create hobby space, hold an RV, give you a place to work without consuming the house. And, unlike repainting a kitchen or replacing flooring, a useful outbuilding can be expensive and difficult to add later. This leads to another important rule. Do not value a rural property exactly the way you would value a suburban house. In a suburb, the kitchen renovation may dominate the listing. In the country, the well, septic system, fencing, driveway, garage, barn, utility setup, and legal access may matter more. The expensive things are often outside the living room. And this is where we reach the biggest mistake buyers make when they search for cheap rural homes. The listing price is not the real price. The real price is the purchase price plus the cost of making the property function for your life. Imagine two homes. The first is listed for $115,000. It looks incredible online. It has more land. The sunsets are spectacular. The house feels unique. But the road is difficult. The water system requires management. The property may not qualify for the loan you expected. The nearest full-service town is an hour away. One of the outbuildings needs work. An addition raises questions you need to investigate. Now imagine another property. It costs $195,000. It is less dramatic. The acreage is smaller. The photos are not as exciting. But it has reliable access, a documented water system, functioning septic, a useful garage, a conventional layout, easier insurance, and financing that does not require you to redesign your entire purchase strategy. You can move in without immediately beginning a second career as a property systems manager. Which one is actually cheaper? There is no universal answer, but the $115,000 property is not automatically the winner. That is the trap. Americans have become so desperate for affordable housing that a low number can shut down normal skepticism. We want the deal to be real, so we stop asking why the deal exists. But every cheap rural property is selling you a trade-off. The goal is not to avoid trade-offs. Every property has them. The goal is to buy the trade-off you actually want. Maybe you genuinely want off-grid independence. Then a solar-powered home with stored water may be exactly right. Maybe you want horses. Then acreage, fencing, and water matter more than being close to restaurants. Maybe you are a woodworker. A large workshop may be worth more to you than a fourth bedroom. Maybe you are retiring. A smaller, single-level house with an easier property to maintain may be smarter than 20 acres that will demand constant work. Maybe you work remotely. Internet reliability may be more important than the mountain view. Maybe you are buying your first home. A conventional property in a small town may be safer than an unusual structure that creates financing problems later. The buyer defines the bargain, not the thumbnail, not the asking price, not the number of acres. Your own life defines whether the deal works. Before becoming emotionally attached to almost any affordable rural property, there are 5 questions worth answering. First, what exactly is the water system? Do not accept private water as the complete answer. Is it a well? A shared well? Hauled water? A storage tank? A community system? rain catchment, or some combination of those things? What records exist? How old is the equipment? What happens if the current system fails? How much would it cost to replace the weakest part? Second, what exactly is legal? Is the access documented? Are additions permitted where required? Is the manufactured home installed and classified correctly for the way you intend to finance it? What does the county allow you to do with the land? Can you add another structure? Can you live in an RV while renovating? Can you run the type of home business you imagine? Rural does not automatically mean rural-free, and your county has the final say on many location-specific questions. Third, what will the property actually cost after closing? Insurance, repairs, road maintenance, propane, well service, septic work, solar battery replacement, heating, fuel for longer drives, equipment for maintaining acreage. A lower mortgage payment can be partially erased by a property that is expensive to operate. Fourth, can you finance the property today, and can the next buyer finance it later? That second question is important. You may plan to live there forever, but life may disagree. A property that only attracts cash buyers has a different resale market from one that qualifies for ordinary financing. An unusual home may be perfect for you, but the future buyer pool may be smaller. That does not mean you should avoid it. It means you should understand it. Fifth, how far are you from the things you will actually use? Not the nearest town name on a map. The actual grocery store, the actual hospital, the actual pharmacy, the actual hardware store, the actual airport if travel matters to you. Drive the route. Do not imagine it. A distance that feels reasonable on a sunny Saturday afternoon can feel very different in winter, after dark, during an emergency, or when you have to make the same trip several times every week. After all of those warnings, here is the reason New Mexico still deserves attention. The opportunities are real. Buyers willing to look outside the obvious markets can still find combinations of house, land, workspace, views, and privacy that would cost dramatically more in many better-known Western destinations. One area may be expensive. Another may feel almost forgotten. One property may be a conventional site-built home. Another may be adobe. Another may be manufactured. Another may be partially off-grid. Another may be a 100-year-old townhouse with a garage and basement. The diversity is exactly why the state can still surprise people. But the strongest deals are often not the wildest ones. They are the boring properties where the expensive infrastructure is already solved. A working water system, a legal septic system, good access, a useful outbuilding, a maintained roof, a reasonable drive to services, a home that can actually be insured and financed. Those things do not always create the most dramatic thumbnail, but they can create the best ownership experience. So what can your money actually buy in New Mexico? Below $100,000, it may buy possibility, but usually with work, unusual systems, location compromises, or a lifestyle that demands more involvement from the owner. Between $100,000 and $175,000, it can begin to buy a functioning home with space, especially if you are open to manufactured housing, smaller towns, or unconventional locations. Between $175,000 and $250,000, the options can become far more serious. Acreage, barns, workshops, better infrastructure, newer homes. Properties that are not merely cheap, but genuinely practical for daily life. And as the budget moves higher, something increasingly rare in America can come into reach. Not a mansion, not a luxury home, something more useful. A normal life with room around it. The ability to step outside without looking directly into someone else's kitchen. A place for a garden. A place for tools. A place for a dog to run. A garage that actually holds more than storage boxes. A workshop where you can build something. A view that belongs to the landscape instead of an advertising brochure. That is the opportunity. But the smartest buyers do not chase cheap. They chase value. Because the best affordable house is not the one with the lowest number on the listing page. It is the one whose compromises you understand before you buy it. It is the one where the expensive problems have already been solved, or where the remaining problems are problems you are genuinely willing and able to handle. It is the one that works not only on the day you sign the papers, but 5 years later, when the excitement is gone and the property has become your ordinary life. And in New Mexico, that may be the difference between finding a home the rest of the market overlooked and discovering exactly why everyone else overlooked it. So here is the question. Would you rather spend around $100,000 on a remote property and manage more of your own water, power, repairs, and distance? Or spend closer to $200,000 for less land but easier utilities, simpler financing, and faster access to everyday services? There is no correct answer, but your answer tells you something important. It tells you what kind of bargain you should actually be searching for. Because the cheapest home in New Mexico is not necessarily the best deal. The best deal is the property whose trade-offs match the life you genuinely want to live.